I spent 38 years reading spreadsheets the way other men read the sports page, and it was a spreadsheet that finally told me my daughter had turned my grandson's college fund into a down payment on her husband's boat. So I flew to Charleston, sat in my daughter's kitchen, and waited for her to notice the folder on the table before she asked me for another dime. My name is Walter Reyes. I am 63 years old. For 38 years, I worked as a certified public accountant, the last 20 of them auditing pension funds for the state of Ohio, which means I have spent my entire adult life doing exactly one thing: finding the number that does not belong. Before I go any further, tell me in the comments where you're watching this from tonight. And if you have ever handed your family something precious and watched them treat it like it was owed to them, hit that like button because you already know where this story's going. The garage smelled like fresh paint and old motor oil, and underneath both of those, faintly, like betrayal. I stood in the doorway of my son-in-law's three-car garage in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, looking at a 26-foot center console boat with a price sticker still curling off the windshield in the June heat. My wife Carol stood beside me, one hand pressed flat against her chest the way she does when she is trying to remember how to breathe normally. We had flown down for our grandson Mason's 9th birthday party. We had not flown down to see a boat. My daughter Emily found us standing there. She was holding a paper plate of cake, and she smiled the particular smile she has worn since she was a teenager, the one that means she already knows she has done something wrong and has decided in advance that she is not going to feel bad about it. "Isn't it beautiful?" she said. "Derek's been wanting one for years." I did not say anything at first. I looked at the boat. I looked at the 22-foot beam, the twin outboard engines, the leather bolsters still wrapped in plastic. In my head, without meaning to, I was already running the number. 31 years of experience does that to a man. You cannot turn it off any more than you can unlearn how to read. "How much?" I said. It was not really a question. It came out flat, the way I used to ask it in conference rooms when a controller's numbers didn't add up and everyone in the room already knew it. Emily laughed, a little too brightly. "Dad, don't be like that. It's a good deal." Derek got it below market. Carol's hand found my arm and squeezed. A silent request that I let it go. Just for today, just until after the party. I have spent 40 years of marriage learning when to listen to that squeeze and when not to. I let it go. For the party. But that night, back in the guest room of my daughter's house, lying awake next to Carol's steady breathing, I could not let it go the way I had let go of 100 smaller things over the years: the vacations we'd quietly funded, the temporary loans that were never repaid, the excuses that had grown, over a decade, from small and reasonable into something else entirely. Something had shifted in my chest weeks earlier, and I hadn't wanted to name it. I named it now. It was not annoyance. It was recognition. The recognition of a man who has spent his career looking at numbers that were supposed to add up and don't, and who has just realized the discrepancy is sitting in his own family. 4 years ago, when our grandson Mason was 5, Carol and I had opened a $529 college savings account in his name. We funded it ourselves every month, without fail, because Emily and Derek had told us more than once that money was tight right now, just until Derek's commission structure evens out. We believed them. We wanted to believe them. Carol had grown up the daughter of a man who worked 2 jobs and never once had anything left over for her. Watching our grandson have a future paid for in advance was, for her, something close to a religious experience. I had structured the account so that Emily was listed as custodian, a decision I made because I trusted her, because she was my daughter, because 38 years of forensic instinct apparently still has a blind spot exactly the size and shape of your own child. I did not sleep that night. At 5 in the morning, before the house woke up, I sat at the kitchen island with my laptop and logged into the account portal using the same login I had used every month for 4 years to make the deposit and had never once used to look closer. The withdrawal history did not lie. It never does. That is the entire foundation of my life's work numbers. Do not have feelings, do not have excuses, do not owe you an explanation. They simply are what they are, and what they were, in this case, was a series of 5 withdrawals over the preceding 8 months, each one just under the threshold that would have triggered an automated review flag, totaling $41,200. I sat very still. I have interviewed men who embezzled 7 figures from pension funds, watched them sweat through their shirts while I laid their own numbers out in front of them, and I did not feel then what I felt looking at my own daughter's name on a withdrawal authorization. It was colder than anger. It was the particular, specific stillness that settles over you when something you assumed was structural load-bearing turns out to have been hollow the whole time. I traced the transfers. It took me 11 minutes. The money had moved from the 529 into Emily and Derek's joint checking account, and from there, in a lump sum 4 days before we arrived for the birthday party, into an escrow account held by a marine dealership on Highway 17. They had used our grandson's college fund to buy a boat. I closed the laptop. I sat in the dark kitchen and listened to the refrigerator hum, and I thought about Mason asleep upstairs, 9 years old, who had drawn Carol a picture last Christmas of the four of us standing in front of a house with a sun in the corner and the words, "My family," misspelled proudly across the top. I thought about the fact that in 9 years, when Mason opened his acceptance letter to whatever school he earned his way into, and there would be a hole in his future, the exact shape and size of a boat his father wanted to impress his golf buddies with. I did not wake Carol, not yet. I needed to be certain, not of the facts. The facts were already certain. Numbers do not lie, but certain of myself. Certain that whatever I did next would come from clarity and not from the kind of hot, reactive anger that makes good men do sloppy things. I had built an entire career on the principle that the moment you tip your hand in anger is the exact moment the person across the table stops being afraid of you. At 7, Carol came downstairs in her robe and found me still sitting at the island. The laptop closed in front of me, my hands folded on top of it like I was praying or presiding over something. She knew immediately. 40 years of marriage means she can read the weather in my face better than I can read a balance sheet. "What did you find?" she said. Not a question either. I opened the laptop and turned it toward her without a word. I watched her read it. I watched the exact moment her eyes reached the dealership name and the number beside it, and I watched something in her, some last, stubborn reserve of maternal benefit of the doubt she had been carrying for years, finally give out completely. She did not cry. She has never been a crier. Not really. Not since her own mother died. She just went very pale and very quiet and said, in a voice I had not heard from her since we buried her father, "That was for his school." "I know," I said. "That was the one thing," she said. "We said we'd never let anything touch." "I know," I said again, because there was nothing else true to say. We did not confront Emily that morning. I want to be honest with you about why, because I think this is the part people misunderstand about men like me, men who spent their careers finding fraud for a living. It is not that I wasn't angry. I was angrier in that moment than I have been in a decade. It is that anger, expressed immediately, gives the other person time to build a story before you finish building your case. I had learned that lesson the hard way in my 20s, walking into a partner's office half-cocked with an accusation I could not yet fully prove, and watching him talk his way out of consequences that, 6 months later, the full audit trail made undeniable. I was not going to make that mistake with my own daughter. I was going to do this the way I had done it for 38 years. Quietly. Completely. With every document already in hand before I said a single accusatory word. So instead, at the birthday party that afternoon, I smiled. I watched Mason blow out 9 candles. I watched Derek stand by his new boat in the driveway, showing it off to a neighbor, one hand resting on the hull the way a man rests his hand on something he believes he has earned. I watched Emily laugh with her friends by the pool, the sound of it drifting over to where Carol and I sat under the patio umbrella, holding hands, saying almost nothing. That night, after the guests left and Mason had fallen asleep clutching a new video game controller, I asked Emily and Derek if we could talk. Just the 4 of us, in the living room. Derek sat down with the particular ease of a man who has never once in his life expected a hard conversation to actually be about him. He put his feet up on the ottoman. "What's up, Walt?" I did not sit. I stood by the fireplace, the way I used to stand at the front of a conference room, and I opened the folder I had printed that afternoon while everyone was at the pool, every withdrawal, every date, every transfer, the escrow confirmation from the dealership with Derek's signature on it, all laid out in the clean, undeniable formatting of a man who has spent his life making sure numbers cannot be argued with. I set it on the coffee table. "I want you to walk me through this," I said. I watched Emily's face change. I watched 31 years of practice reading a balance sheet apply itself, without my even trying, to my own daughter's expression, the half-second of genuine shock, followed immediately by the recalibration, the visible search for an angle. She picked up the folder. She looked at it for a long moment, and then she did something I will remember for the rest of my life. She looked up at me and she smiled that same smile from the garage. And she said, Dad, it's not that big a deal. We were going to pay it back. Derek did not even have the decency to look uncomfortable. He leaned forward, laced his fingers together, and spoke to me the way I imagine he speaks to junior guys at his sales office. Look, Walt, I get that this looks bad on paper, but Emily and I talked about it, and honestly, a kid needs stability more than he needs a trust fund. A boat brings the family together. Weekends on the water, that's an investment too, just a different kind. I let that sentence sit in the room for a moment. A boat, purchased with a 9-year-old's college fund, reframed as an investment in that same 9-year-old. I have listened to embezzlers construct more elaborate justifications than that, dressed up in better vocabulary, and I want you to understand, it never gets easier to hear, no matter how many times you've heard some version of it before. It especially does not get easier when the person saying it is holding your daughter's hand. We were going to pay it back, Emily said again, like repeating it would make it retroactively true. Before Mason even needs it, he's 9, Dad. We have years. You took money that was earning interest for his tuition, I said, and put it into an asset that loses value the second you drive it off the lot. That is not a loan. That is not a different kind of investment. That is theft with a payment plan you invented after the fact to make yourselves feel better about it. Derek's jaw tightened. That's a hell of a word to use about your own daughter. I didn't use it about my daughter, I said. I used it about the withdrawal history. The withdrawal history doesn't care whose name is on it. Carol had not said a word this whole time. She was sitting very upright on the couch, her hands folded in her lap, and I could see her doing what she always does in moments like this, holding herself together through pure force of will, because someone in this family has to be the calm one. And for 40 years, in the hardest moments, that has usually been her, not me. But when Emily turned to her, clearly hoping for an ally, hoping her mother would soften what I had just laid bare, Carol said something I did not expect. I funded that account every single month for 4 years, Carol said very quietly, because I never had one growing up. I promised myself Mason would never know what it feels like to watch other kids get things you can't have. And you took that from him for a boat. Emily's face crumpled, just slightly, at her mother's voice, because you can argue with your father, but there is a particular wound in disappointing your mother that does not have the same defenses built up against it. But then Derek reached over and took her hand, and I watched Emily's face reset, harden, choose him over the shame. Okay, Derek said, standing up now, his voice rising for the first time. I think you two need to take a step back and remember whose house you're standing in. I looked at him for a long moment. I built the deck you're standing on the money for, I said, not shouting. I have never needed to shout to be heard. That was another thing 38 years in conference rooms taught me. I co-signed the loan on this house 4 years ago when your credit wasn't strong enough to qualify a loan. I have paid, directly or indirectly, for a substantial portion of the life you are currently standing in and lecturing me inside of. So let's be very precise about whose house this actually is. Nobody said anything for a moment. Somewhere upstairs, the air conditioning kicked on with a low mechanical hum, and it was the only sound in the room. What do you want? Emily finally said, and her voice had gone smaller. An apology? Fine. I'm sorry, Dad. Is that what you want to hear? No, I said. I want the money back, all of it, into a new account, one I control, one with a custodian who has never once demonstrated she can be trusted with it. And I want the boat sold to cover it, since apparently that's where the money currently lives. Derek actually laughed a short, incredulous bark of a laugh. You want us to sell the boat? I just bought that boat. You bought it with money that belonged to your son, I said. I am not asking you a question. You can't make us do anything, Derek said. It's not your money anymore. It was a gift. And there it was. That is the sentence, ladies and gentlemen, that ends conversations like this one. The moment the person across the table stops pretending there's a misunderstanding and simply asserts that whatever they took is now theirs by right, because you were foolish enough to give it freely in the first place. I have heard that sentence in various forms from executives, from in-laws, from men in $3,000 suits standing in front of juries. It always means the same thing. It means the negotiation is over, and the only leverage left is whatever consequence you're actually willing to enforce. You're right, I said. It was a gift, which is exactly why I structured it the way I did, and exactly why I am now going to exercise the rights that structure gives me. I did not raise my voice. I picked up the folder from the coffee table, closed it, and tucked it under my arm. I'm not going to argue about this tonight, I said. I came down here for my grandson's birthday, and he had a wonderful day, and I am not going to let the two of you turn that into something ugly for him to remember. But you have 30 days. Return the funds in full, or I will pursue every legal avenue available to a custodial account beneficiary's grandparent when the acting custodian has been shown to have misappropriated funds for personal use. And Emily, I will do it. I want you to hear me say that clearly, because I don't think you believe I will. I have spent my entire career proving fraud in rooms full of men who were absolutely certain no one could touch them. I am not afraid of doing it at my own dining room table. Carol stood up beside me. She did not say another word to either of them. She simply walked past Emily, kissed her on the cheek. I noticed that. I want you to notice that too, because it tells you everything about who Carol is. That even in that moment, she could not leave without that small act of love, and walked upstairs to say goodnight to a sleeping 9-year-old who had no idea, not yet, what his birthday had actually cost. We flew home to Columbus 2 days later, a day earlier than planned. Emily did not come to the airport. Derek did not either. Mason hugged us both fiercely at the door and asked when we were coming back. And I told him, soon, buddy, very soon. And I meant it, though not in the way he understood. The next 4 weeks were the quietest my phone has ever been, with my daughter's name on it. Carol checked her phone constantly, that specific, hopeful, dreading way parents check a phone when they're waiting to see if their child is going to do the right thing. I did not check mine. I had already done everything I needed to do. I had drafted a letter, with the help of an old colleague who now practiced elder and family financial law, formally notifying the 529 plan administrator of a custodial breach and requesting an emergency review. I had doxed everything, every withdrawal, every date, every escrow record in a format so complete that any judge, any mediator, any reasonable human being would look at it and understand immediately what had happened. I did not send it, not yet. I gave them the 30 days I promised. I have never in my life told someone a deadline I didn't intend to honor on both ends. On day 26, Emily called. I let it ring twice before I answered, not out of pettiness, but because I needed a moment to make sure my voice, when it came, would be even. Dad, she said, and her voice had none of the brightness from the garage, none of the practiced ease. It sounded like the voice of the 11-year-old girl who used to call me at the office, crying when the other kids at school had been cruel to her. The voice I had once dropped everything for, every single time, no questions asked. The boat's for sale. Derek listed it yesterday. We're getting a check together for the account. I did not gloat. I want to be honest with you. Some old wounded part of me wanted to say something sharp about how quickly a man's principles evaporate once he realizes his father-in-law was not bluffing. I did not say it. Winning ugly is still winning ugly, and I had not done any of this to hurt my daughter. I had done it to protect my grandson, and those are two very different objectives that can look similar from the outside but feel entirely different from the inside. Thank you for calling to tell me, I said. There was a long pause on the line. I could hear her breathing, could hear, faintly, the sound of Mason's video game in the background. Derek's angry, she said. He thinks I sided with you over him. Did you? I asked. Another pause, longer this time. I sided with Mason, she said finally quietly, and for the first time in weeks I heard something in her voice that sounded like my daughter again, and not like the woman who had stood in that garage smiling at a boat bought with her son's future. That's the only side there ever was, I said. The check arrived 3 weeks later, the full $41,200, plus a modest amount extra that Emily said, in the note she included, was interest, because you were right, and I should have thought about it that way from the beginning. I opened a new account. I structured it this time with Carol and me as co-custodians, with a provision that requires both our signatures for any withdrawal until Mason turns 18. I am not naive enough to believe one hard conversation permanently repairs what let this happen in the first place. But I am not naive enough, either, to leave the same door unlocked twice. Derek and Emily separated 4 months later, not because of the boat itself. Emily told Carol during a long phone call I only heard one half of, but because the boat had simply been the first time she had ever actually stood somewhere other than beside him, and once she'd done it once, she found she could not stop noticing all the other places she'd been standing beside him instead of where she should have been standing all along. I do not take satisfaction in a marriage ending. I want to be clear about that. But I will say this. Watching my daughter find her own spine again at 34 years old, after watching her lose so much of it for so long, was one of the more quietly moving things I have witnessed in my life. Mason is 9.5 now. He does not know the full story, and he may never need to. What he knows is that his grandfather flies down more often now, that his mother takes him fishing off a public dock instead of a boat that no longer exists, and that there is a number in an account he cannot touch for years yet that keeps getting a little bit bigger every month, steady and reliable, the way it always should have been. Carol and I sat on our back porch in Columbus a few weeks ago, in the last warm evening before fall really settled in, and she asked me if I thought I'd done the right thing, going after the money the way I did, treating my own daughter the way I'd have treated a stranger under audit. I thought about it for a long time before I answered, because I owed her a real answer, not a comfortable one. I didn't treat her like a stranger, I said. I treated the situation honestly. That's not the same thing as not loving her. Sometimes the most honest thing you can do for someone you love is refuse to let them get away with something, because getting away with it is what would actually cost them. In the end, far more than getting caught ever will. Carol reached over and took my hand, the same way she had in that garage in Charleston, except this time the squeeze meant something different. Not a plea to let something go. A quiet thank you for not letting it go. We do not talk about the boat anymore. We do not need to. Some lessons, once they are truly learned, do not require repeating. They simply become the quiet architecture underneath everything a family builds next, the load-bearing wall nobody sees anymore, but that everything, from now on, depends on standing straight.